The rope snapped. Joaquin Valdez caught Serafina Morningstar's limp body as she plummeted from the gallows. The crude hangman's noose finally giving way after 3 agonizing minutes of her silent struggle. Blood thundered in his ears as he pressed his face against her throat, feeling for the faintest whisper of life beneath her bruised skin. "Breathe, damn you," he whispered, his calloused fingers working frantically to loosen the rope that had bitten deep red welts around her neck. Breathe. The town square had emptied moments after the trapdoor fell, the good people of Millfield satisfied that justice had been served. They'd watched with righteous fervor as the woman who dared love an outlaw paid the ultimate price. None stayed to witness the miracle of her survival, the divine intervention that had weakened the rope just enough to grant her one. Final chance. Seraphine's chest barely rose. Her lips, once full and inviting, were now blue-tinged and still. Joaquin lifted her into his arms, her auburn hair spilling like liquid fire across his leather vest as he carried her toward the abandoned mine shaft at the edge of town. He'd prepared this refuge weeks ago, knowing this day would come, praying he'd never need to use it. The mine's entrance was concealed behind a tangle of wild roses that had grown over the wooden supports. Joaquin pushed through the thorns, ignoring how they tore at his clothes and skin. Inside, he'd stockpiled everything needed for Seraphine's recovery. Clean water, bandages, medicinal herbs his grandmother had taught him to use, and enough provisions to last a month. He laid her on the makeshift bed of wool blankets and began his desperate work. First, he cleaned the rope burns with cool water, then applied a poultice of yarrow and comfrey to reduce the swelling. Her breathing remained shallow, but it was breathing nonetheless. "You stubborn, beautiful fool," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I told you to leave town before they came for you. I told you loving me would be your death." Serafina had refused to run. Even when Sheriff Bromwell Crenshaw had stormed her boarding house with a warrant for her arrest, even when the townspeople had spat accusations of harboring criminals and corrupting their community's moral fiber, she'd stood tall. She'd faced the kangaroo court with dignity, never once revealing Joaquin's whereabouts or begging for mercy she knew wouldn't come. The trial had been a mockery lasting less than an hour. Judge Cornelius Weatherby, in the pocket of the railroad company that wanted Joaquin's land, had pronounced her guilty of aiding and abetting known criminals. The sentence, death by hanging at dawn. Joaquin had watched from the hills as they erected the gallows in the town square. He'd seen them drag her from the jail, her hands bound behind her back, her green eyes blazing with defiance even in her final moments. The shot he'd planned to take, the one that would have cut her free before the trap dropped, had been blocked by an unexpected shift in the crowd now. As darkness fell over the mine, Joaquin kept vigil beside the womanhood, chosen love over life. Her pulse was stronger now, her breathing deeper. The miracle of the broken rope had given them both a second chance. Dawn crept through the mine entrance like a hesitant thief, casting pale fingers of light across Seraphine's still form. Joaquin hadn't slept, hadn't moved from her side except to fetch fresh water or adjust her blankets. Every shallow breath she took felt like a victory against the forces that had tried to steal her from him. Her eyes fluttered open as the first rays touched her face. "Am I dead?" she whispered, her voice barely a rasp through her damaged throat. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Joaquin replied, lifting a cup of cool water to her lips. "Drink slowly." Seraphine's fingers found the tender skin of her neck, tracing the rope burns that would scar her forever. The gallows, ... I remember falling. The pain stopped. Tears gathered in her eyes as memory flooded back. They wanted you. I could have told them where you were. I could have saved myself. And damned us both. Joaquin took her hand, marveling at how delicate it felt despite the calluses from her work at the boarding house. "You're stronger than any man in that town, Sierra. Stronger than me." She tried to sit up, wincing as the movement sent fire through her bruised throat. "How long have I been here?" 18 hours. The whole town thinks you're dead. They even held a burial service, dropped an empty coffin into a grave marked with your name. Joaquin's jaw clenched. Sheriff Crenshaw made a show of it, talking about the wages of sin and the price of defying God's will. "Good," Serafina said, surprising him with the steel in her voice. "Let them think I'm dead. Let them believe their justice was served." She struggled to her feet, leaning heavily against the mine wall, because the woman they hanged is dead. "I won't be here anymore." Joaquin studied her face in the dim light. The ordeal had changed her. There was something harder in her eyes. Now something that spoke of lines crossed and innocence lost. The gentle boarding-house keeper who'd fallen in love with an outlaw was gone. In her place stood someone who'd stared death in the face and walked away transformed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they made their choice when they put that rope around my neck. Now I'll make mine." She moved to the entrance of the mine, peering through the rose bushes at the town below. Smoke rose from morning cooking fires, and she could see people moving about their daily routines as if nothing had changed. "They took everything from me, my reputation, my livelihood, my life, all because I loved you, Sierra." "No," she turned back to him, and he saw something wild and dangerous dancing in her green eyes. "They want to believe I'm a criminal? They want to think love makes monsters of decent people? Then I'll show them what a real monster looks like." Joaquin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. This wasn't the woman he'd fallen in love with. The one who'd tended his wounds with gentle hands and spoken of building a life together somewhere far from the violence that followed him. This was someone harder, someone forged in the fire of injustice and betrayal. "What are you planning?" he asked, though part of him already knew. Serafina smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Sheriff Crenshaw keeps the tax money in his office safe. Judge Weatherby has a strong box full of railroad bribes. And that sanctimonious preacher, Reverend Holcomb, has been skimming from the collection plate for years." She moved closer to Joaquin, her damaged voice dropping to a whisper. "They called me a criminal for loving you. Maybe it's time I earned the title." The Bank of Millfield stood like a monument to respectability on Main Street, its red brick facade and brass fittings gleaming in the afternoon sun. Joaquin crouched behind a water trough, watching Sheriff Crenshaw swagger through the front doors for his weekly deposit of protection fees. Collected from local businesses, 3 days had passed since Seraphine's resurrection. 3 days of careful planning and preparation. She'd insisted on scouting the town herself, moving through shadows and alleyways with the skill of someone who'd spent a lifetime invisible to those who mattered. The shy boarding-house keeper was truly dead in her place, moved a ghost with nothing left to lose. "They'll be inside for exactly 12 minutes, Seraphine's voice whispered from the alley beside the bank. "That's how long it takes him to count the money, recorded in his ledger." And sampled the whiskey banker Morrison keeps in his desk drawer. Joaquin nodded, checking the position of the sun. Their plan was ambitious, bordering on insane hit. 3 targets in rapid succession, while the town was distracted by the weekly cattle auction. They'd steal enough to disappear forever, but more importantly, they'd expose the corruption that festered beneath Millfield's righteous exterior. "Joaquin." Serafina appeared beside him, her face partially hidden beneath a man's hat pulled low. She'd bound her breasts and adopted masculine clothing, transforming herself into just another drifter passing through town. "Promise me something. Anything. This goes wrong if they catch us. ... Don't try to save me again. I won't survive another hanging, and I won't watch them put a rope around your neck." Her green eyes burned with intensity. "Promise me you'll run." Before he could answer, the bank doors opened and Sheriff Crenshaw emerged, his belly straining against his vest as he picked his teeth with a silver toothpick. The corrupt lawman surveyed the street with the lazy confidence of a man who owned everything he saw. "He's moving toward the courthouse," Serafina observed. "Judge Weatherby's expecting his cut of this week's take." Joaquin felt his blood boil as he watched Crenshaw's casual stroll toward the building where Serafina had been condemned to die. The same judge who'd pronounced her guilty without evidence would now count blood money stolen from honest citizens. "Time." "To go," Serafina said, pulling a bandana up over her face. "Remember, quick and clean. We're ghosts, not killers." They moved simultaneously. Joaquin heading for the courthouse while Serafina slipped toward the church where Reverend Holcomb was counting the week's offerings. The plan required perfect timing, create enough chaos to mask their true objective while gathering evidence of the corruption that ran through. Millfield like poison in a well. Joaquin reached the courthouse's rear entrance as Judge Weatherby's voice boomed through his office window. Told you the railroad wants that land cleared by month's end? I don't care if you have to trump up charges against every homesteader in the territory. What about the Valdez place? Crenshaw's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. That outlaw's been hiding there for months. If we can't catch him, maybe we burn him out. Do whatever's necessary. The railroad's paying us enough to retire wealthy men. Papers rustled as Weatherby opened what sounded like a heavy chest. Just make sure there are no witnesses. Can't afford another bleeding heart like that, Morningstar woman stirring up sympathy for criminals. Guy. Joaquin's hands clenched into fists as he heard them discuss Seraphine's execution with casual indifference. These men had murdered an innocent woman to protect their scheme. They felt no remorse whatsoever. The courthouse's back door stood slightly ajar. Serafina had picked the lock during her scouting mission. Joaquin slipped inside, moving silently through the shadowy hallway toward Weatherby's office. Through the keyhole, we could see the judge counting stacks of bills while Crenshaw helped himself to bourbon from a crystal decanter. The explosion that rocked Reverend Holcomb's church sent windows rattling throughout Millfield's business district. Joaquin felt the floor vibrate beneath his feet as shocked voices erupted from Judge Weatherby's office. What in hell? Crenshaw lunged toward the window, his hand instinctively going to his gun. The church. Weatherby's voice cracked with panic. Someone's blown up the church. Joaquin smiled grimly as chaos erupted outside. Seraphine's diversion was working perfectly. The small charge of black powder she'd planted in the church's bell tower had created a spectacular, but harmless, explosion, sending the bronze bell crashing down into the yard while leaving the building intact. Every able-bodied man in town would rush to help fight what appeared to be a catastrophic fire. Crenshaw bolted for the door, his boots thundering down the courthouse stairs. Morrison, get every man with a bucket. That fire spreads, Judge. Weatherby fumbled for his coat, leaving his office door wide open in his haste. Joaquin waited until their footsteps faded before slipping inside the abandoned room. The judge's strongbox sat open on his desk, revealing neat stacks of railroad money alongside carefully organized ledgers, documenting years of bribery and corruption. Joaquin photographed key pages with the small camera he'd purchased from a traveling photographer, gathering evidence that would destroy Weatherby's reputation even if they never saw justice in a courtroom. Through the window, he could see half the town running toward the church where Serafina was no doubt already melting back into the crowd. The woman had proven herself a master of misdirection, appearing to help fight the fire while actually ensuring it spread just enough to maintain the distraction. Joaquin pocketed several $100s from the strongbox, leaving behind the ledgers and most of the money. This wasn't about theft. It was about exposure. When Weatherby returned to find evidence of the break-in, he'd know someone had discovered his secrets. A child's scream cut through the afternoon air, followed by adult shouts of genuine panic. Joaquin's blood chilled as he realized something had gone wrong at the church. That wasn't the controlled chaos of Seraphine's diversion. That was real terror. He vaulted through the office window and ran toward the growing crowd, pushing through clusters of townspeople until he could see the church clearly. The bell tower was indeed damaged, smoking but not burning as planned. But near the front steps, a timber from the tower had fallen across someone's legs. "It's little Bobby Henderson," someone screamed. The beams got him pinned. Joaquin's heart sank as he saw Serafina, still disguised as a male drifter, desperately trying to lift the heavy timber off the trapped child. Her face was pale with horror. This hadn't been part of the plan. No one was supposed to be hurt. Sheriff Crenshaw arrived with a group of men, his face red from running. "You men, get that beam up, carefully now. We don't know what other damage that explosion caused." Joaquin found himself moving forward before conscious thought took over. A child's life hung in the balance, and planning be damned he couldn't stand by and watch an innocent suffer for their vendetta against corruption. "Here," he called out, throwing his shoulder against the timber alongside 4 other men. "On 3, lift." The beam rose slowly, allowing Dr. Marcus Pemberton to pull the unconscious boy free. Bobby's leg was clearly broken, but he was breathing. He would live. As the crowd focused on the injured child, Joaquin caught Seraphine's eye across the chaos. Her face reflected his own horror at the unintended consequences of their actions. They'd become the very thing they'd sought to fight, people who endangered innocence in pursuit of their goals. "The boy will be fine," Dr. Pemberton announced, cradling Bobby in his arms. Broken leg, some bruises, but nothing that won't heal. Relief flooded through Joaquin, but it was tainted by the knowledge that their righteous anger had nearly cost a child his life. As the crowd began to disperse, he saw Serafina slip away toward their rendezvous point. Her shoulders bowed with guilt. The revolution that had begun with such burning purpose was already showing its true cost. Serafina sat in the abandoned mine, staring at her hands as if they were stained with blood. The money they'd stolen lay forgotten on the ground beside her, nearly $800 that could buy them passage to California and a new life beyond the reach of Millfield's corruption. "The boy's going to be fine," Joaquin said. The third time, trying to break through the wall of self-recrimination she'd built around herself. Dr. Pemberton said, "I know what he said." Her voice was hollow, devoid of the fire that had driven her for the past 3 days. "But it doesn't change what almost happened. I nearly killed a child because I wanted revenge." Joaquin knelt beside her, gently taking her trembling hands in his. The rope burns around her neck were healing, but he could see that deeper wounds had opened in her soul. "You're not a killer, Sierra. What happened today proves that you tried to save Bobby even though it put you at risk." "Did I?" She looked up at him with haunted eyes. "Or did I just panic when I realized how far I'd fallen?" She pulled her hands free and stood, pacing to the mine entrance. "They were right about me, Joaquin. The judge, the sheriff, all of them. I am corrupted. I am dangerous. You're nothing like them, aren't I?" She turned back to face him, and he saw tears streaming down her cheeks. They use violence to protect their interests. They hurt innocent people to maintain their power. How is what we did today any different? Joaquin wanted to argue, wanted to point out the vast moral difference between their actions and the systematic corruption that plagued Millfield. But watching a child nearly die because of their vendetta had shaken his own certainty. Were they freedom fighters striking back at injustice? Or had they simply become criminals, justifying theft and violence with noble-sounding words? "Maybe it isn't different," he admitted quietly. "Okay, maybe we've both lost our way." Serafina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks in the dust that covered her face. "I keep thinking about what my mother would say if she could see me now. She raised me to be a lady, to treat others with kindness and respect." She laughed bitterly. "Instead, I've become an outlaw's woman who plants bombs in churches." "Your mother would be proud," Joaquin said firmly. "She'd be proud that you stood up to injustice, that you refused to let them break your spirit. Would she? Or would she be ashamed that her daughter chose revenge over redemption?" Serafina picked up one of the stolen money bundles, turning it over in her hands. "This belongs to the people of Millfield, doesn't it? The money Crenshaw extorts, the bribes Weatherby takes, it all comes from honest citizens who just want to live their lives in peace." A new idea began to form in Joaquin's mind, sparked by her words. What if we gave it back? What? Not to Crenshaw or Weatherby, to the people it was stolen from. He stood and began pacing, his excitement growing. "We know which businesses Crenshaw's been bleeding dry. We know which families have been forced off their land by Weatherby's corrupt rulings. What if we became something other than thieves?" Serafina stared at him as understanding dawned in her eyes. "You're talking about becoming ... Robin Hood." "I'm talking about becoming what they accused us of being, champions of the people they've been oppressing." Joaquin picked up the evidence they'd gathered from Weatherby's office. "We have proof of their corruption. We have money to return to its rightful owners. And we have something else they don't expect." "What's that?" "We're already dead." Joaquin smiled, feeling purpose return to his heart. Serafina Morningstar died on those gallows. Everyone in town saw it happen. That gives us power. They can't fight the power of ghosts. For the first time since the accident at the church, Serafina smiled back. The dead have nothing left to lose, and everything to give. 3 weeks later, the legend of the Millfield. Ghosts had spread throughout the territory like wildfire. It began with Widow Patterson finding an envelope under her door, containing enough money to pay off the mortgage that Sheriff Crenshaw had been using to extort her. Inside was a note written in feminine handwriting, "For your late husband's service to this community. Justice delayed is not justice denied. -S.ML." Then came the mysterious donations to families driven from their homesteads by Judge Weatherby's corrupt rulings. Money appeared in their temporary camps, always accompanied by documents proving the illegal nature of their evictions. Some families chose to fight back in court with their newfound resources, while others used the funds to start fresh in territories where justice wasn't for sale. Joaquin and Serafina moved through the countryside like avenging angels, striking at the corrupt network that extended far beyond Millfield's borders. They'd learned that Weatherby and Crenshaw were small fish in a larger scheme. The railroad company had corrupted officials throughout 3 counties, systematically stealing land and resources while hiding behind the veneer of civilization. Target. Approaching, Serafina whispered from her position in the rocks above Dead Man's Canyon. Below them, a heavily guarded railroad payroll wagon wound its way through the narrow pass, carrying money intended to bribe territorial legislators into granting more land concessions. Joaquin checked his position behind a fallen tree, ensuring his rifle had a clear line of sight. They'd spent days planning this robbery, studying guard rotations and wagon schedules. Unlike their chaotic debut in Millfield, this operation would be executed with military precision. "Remember," he called softly, "we want the strong box, not blood. These guards are just working men doing their jobs." "Understood," Serafina replied, though her voice carried an edge that worried him. The past 3 weeks had hardened her in ways that went beyond physical toughness. She'd become efficient at violence, comfortable with the tools of intimidation. The wagon entered the kill zone, its iron-reinforced wheels clattering against the rocky ground. Joaquin counted 6 guards for riding alongside the wagon, and 2 on the driver's bench. All were armed with Winchester rifles and looked competent enough to make this interesting. "Now," he whispered. Seraphine's shot shattered the silence, sending a carefully aimed bullet into the wagon's front wheel. The damaged spokes splintered with a crack like thunder, causing the wagon to lurch violently to one side. As the guards struggled to control their startled horses, Joaquin emerged from cover with his rifle trained on the lead rider. "Easy now," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man comfortable with violence. "Nobody needs to die today. We just want what doesn't belong to you anyway." The lead guard, a grizzled veteran with intelligent eyes, sized up the situation quickly. 2 shooters in good cover, damaged wagon, and horses spooked by the gunfire. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "You're the Millfield ghosts," he said, not quite making it a question. "Guilty as charged," Serafina replied, stepping into view with her rifle steady. "Though I prefer to think of ourselves as debt collectors. That money's under railroad protection." "That money was stolen from honest people," Joaquin corrected. "We're just returning it to its rightful owners." The guard considered this for a long moment, then slowly reached for his gun belt. "I've got a job to do, Ghost. Same as you, I suppose." What happened next would haunt Joaquin for the rest of his life. The guard's hand moved toward his weapon with professional speed, but Seraphine's rifle cracked first. Man-center mass, spinning him from his saddle to land in a sprawl of dust and blood. Joaquin screamed, but it was too late. The other guards opened fire, and suddenly the canyon filled with the thunder of gunshots and the screams of wounded horses. When the smoke cleared, 3 men lay dead, and the wagon was a shattered wreck. Serafina stood over the fallen lead guard, her face blank as marble as blood pooled in the dust around his still form. "He was drawing," she said tonelessly. "I had no choice." But Joaquin had seen it differently. The guard's movement had been slow, telegraphed a man trying to do his duty despite facing impossible odds. Serafina could have wounded him, could have let Joaquin handle the situation. Instead, she'd chosen the solution that guaranteed no complications. The avenging angel had become something else entirely. The graveyard on the hill, overlooking Millfield, had grown by 1 headstone since that terrible day in Dead Man's Canyon. Joaquin knelt beside the fresh marker, his hat in his hands, as morning mist swirled around the weathered crosses and stone monuments. Serafina Morningstar, he read aloud, tracing the carved letters with one finger. Born in love, died for love, remembered in love. 3 months had passed since their last job. 3 months since Serafina had finally admitted what they'd both known for weeks: she was dying. The damage from the hanging had been more severe than either of them realized. Internal injuries. The doctor in Santa Fe had explained: trauma to her throat and spine that was slowly shutting down her body's vital functions. I won't let you waste your life watching me fade, she'd told him during their final weeks together in a cabin outside. Taus, I want you to go back to Millfield. I want you to finish what we started. I can't do this without you. Yes, you can. She'd taken his hands in hers. So thin now they felt like bird bones. But do it right this time. Do it the way my mother would have wanted, with mercy instead of vengeance. Now, 6 weeks after her peaceful death in his arms, Joaquin had returned. To honor her final request, but not as an outlaw seeking revenge, as a man ready to forge a different kind of justice. Sheriff Crenshaw's corruption had finally caught up with him. The evidence Joaquin and Serafina had gathered months earlier had found its way to territorial authorities, triggering an investigation that toppled the entire network of bribed officials. Crenshaw himself sat in the territorial prison, awaiting trial for extortion and murder. Judge Weatherby had fled to Mexico with what remained of his stolen fortune, leaving behind a vacant bench in a community struggling to rebuild trust in their institutions. You were right about one thing, Joaquin said to the headstone. We couldn't change this place through violence, but maybe we can change it through example. He stood and walked down the hill toward Main Street, where a modest crowd had gathered outside the courthouse. Today marked the election of Millfield's new Sherifa, clean slate for a community ready to embrace genuine law and order. Joaquin Valdez. He turned to find Dr. Marcus Pemberton approaching, the same man who'd saved little Bobby Henderson's life during the church incident. The physician looked older now, worn down by the revelations of corruption that had shaken the town's foundation. Doctor Joaquin nodded respectfully. I wanted to thank you, Pemberton said quietly, for what you and Miss Morningstar did. Not the violence, I can't condone that, but the truth you brought to light. This town was rotting from the inside, and sometimes it takes a shock to make people see clearly. She paid a heavy price for that truth. Yes, she did. Pemberton glanced toward the graveyard, but her sacrifice meant something. The new sheriff they're about to elect, he's an honest man. The judge they're bringing in from the territorial capital has a reputation for fairness. The changes you two started are taking root. Joaquin felt a weight lift from his shoulders, not the burden of guilt, which would always remain, but the crushing uncertainty about whether their actions had meant anything beyond destruction. There's something else, Pemberton continued. The town council voted to establish a fund for families affected by the corruption. Widow Patterson suggested they name it after Miss Morningstar. Oh, would you object to that? Joaquin smiled for the first time in weeks. She'd like that. She always believed in taking care of people. As the crowd cheered the announcement of their new sheriff's victory, Joaquin felt Seraphine's presence like a warm breeze against his face. She'd been right about redemption being more powerful than revenge, about mercy triumphing over justice. The woman they'd hanged for loving an outlaw had become a saint in death, her memory inspiring the very changes she'd fought for in life. And somewhere in the territory beyond Millfield's borders, families driven from their homes were building new lives with money returned by ghosts, would learn to choose love over vengeance. Joaquin tipped his hat to the headstone on the hill, mounted his horse, and rode toward the sunset. Behind him, Millfield began the long work of healing. Ahead lay a world where an outlaw could choose to become something better, not despite the woman he'd loved, but because of her. The legend of the Millfield ghosts would live on in whispered stories around campfires and in the grateful prayers of families whose lives had been touched by their strange justice. But the man who rode away that evening carried something more precious than legend. He carried the memory of a love strong enough to transform hatred into hope and death into eternal life. In the end, Serafina Morningstar had saved them all.